Everyone in that hall believed I was the help, the invisible kind, the kind that refills water glasses and never makes eye contact and disappears between moments. They were right about one part. The flowers alone cost more than my rent. I know this because I heard the florist arguing at 6 that morning, $12,000 in gardenias for one room, one morning. And I was the person mopping the corridor behind her. Not one person in that hall registered my presence. I had been searched twice, briefed once, and handed a station assignment like a tools checklist. But here is what nobody in that hall knew. I had asked for this assignment. I requested the East Corridor specifically. I requested those drapes. My name is Kira Sinclair. I have worked luxury catering for 3 years, and I have made myself into furniture in rooms like this, on purpose, methodically, because furniture sees everything. That is the job I actually do, not the one on my contract. I watch rooms. I read weight. I catalog the things that do not belong. Today I was cataloging gardenias and water pitchers and the 400 people who all believed this room was completely sealed. The real threat in that hall was not the man at the altar. It was the shape pressing against the red velvet drape on the east wall, slow, patient, the kind of stillness that belongs to someone who trusts patience more than speed. The dot appeared on Joon-seo Kang's chest at 12:04 p.m. Red, motionless, the diameter of a pencil eraser, sitting directly over his heart while 400 people watched his face. His own security team was already in the room, all 12 of them, and not one of them saw it. I reached for the rope, and that is when I saw the second shape, not behind the curtain, beside me. If you're the kind of person who always notices what everyone else misses, you belong here with us. You have that rare instinct most people lack. Don't be a ghost in the comments. Hit subscribe and drop a like right now to prove you would have spotted that red dot before it was too late. Show us you aren't completely blind like the rest of them. The second shape was a hand. Gloved, pressed flat against the east wall 6 inches from where I was standing, and it was not moving toward the drape. It was already braced against it, holding it still from outside, keeping it closed. I did not scream. I pulled the rope anyway. The curtain rings scraped metal and 12 feet of red velvet collapsed outward, and the service corridor opened to 400 people simultaneously. The sniper was backlit, unmistakable. Rifle raised, body positioned, the dot vanished from Joon-seo's chest the instant the light hit him. The room broke open, but the hand against the wall was gone. Nobody saw the hand. In the chaos of the screaming and the security formation closing around the altar, there were only 2 visible facts: a sniper behind a curtain and a black woman in catering uniform holding the rope that opened it. That image assembled into a story before anyone asked a single question. I watched it happen on their faces, the calculation, the resequencing of what they thought they had just seen. One of Joon-seo's family members said it aloud. She said it in Korean, but the tone required no translation. The woman who opened the curtain, the woman who was already at the correct position, the woman who knew exactly when to pull. A junior member of the Kang security team reached me before any venue staff did. He did not ask my name. He told me I was not to leave the building. He stood close enough that leaving was not a question I could ask. I told him what I saw, the shape behind the drape, the red dot, the 7-second window. He listened with the particular stillness of someone deciding whether the information is credible or a performance of credibility. He asked me one question: how did I know to look at the curtain? I told him the truth, the weight of the fabric, the way it moved like something pressed against it with intent. He wrote nothing down. He looked at me for a long moment and then he looked at my hands. My hands were still shaking. He took my phone. He said it was standard procedure. He said someone would come to speak with me shortly. He positioned himself between me and the nearest exit and did not move again. Somewhere in the private wing, the sniper was already giving a name. I did not know that yet. What I knew was the hand against the wall, the one nobody else had seen, and the fact that whoever it belonged to was still inside the building. And they knew I had noticed. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in those seconds. Not the version people tell at dinner parties. Not the version that makes me sound certain. The real version. The one where I almost walked away. Because I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. 3 steps to my left and I become furniture again. Back turned. Water pitcher in hand. 400 people between me and whatever was about to happen. Nobody would ever know I saw it. Nobody would ever know I was standing at the only angle in that room with a clear sightline to that dot. I thought, this is not your world, Kira. This man has 12 trained security personnel in this room. He has an organization built on survival. He has people whose entire job is to stand between him and exactly this kind of moment. And then I looked at those 12 trained security personnel. Not one of them was watching his chest. They were watching doors, watching guests, watching each other. They had mapped every threat that could walk into this room. They had not mapped the one that was already inside it, behind a curtain that someone had told them was decorative. That is the detail that made my decision for me. Not courage, not heroism, not some deep moral calling. The simple, specific fact that every person whose job it was to protect this man was looking in the wrong direction, and I was the only one looking in the right one. If I screamed, the sniper fired immediately. If I ran for a guard, I announced the threat and he fired immediately. If I stood still and did nothing, a man died from 7 feet away while I held a water pitcher and told myself it was not my problem. There was one move, just one, and it was the move that looked most wrong from the outside. Most people would have walked away. You know that, right? But if you have the guts to stand your ground when the whole world is looking the wrong direction, you are our kind of viewer. Like this video right now, if you would have possessed the courage to pull that rope and comment what your hands would be doing in that exact moment. Don't leave Kira standing there alone to face the consequences. My hands were shaking when I grabbed it, not a little. The kind of shaking that means your body has already processed the danger your brain is still arguing about. The kind that means some part of you knows exactly what pulling this rope is going to cost. I pulled it anyway. And the room was never the same again. The sound the curtain rings made on that rod is the sound I hear when I cannot sleep. Not the screaming that came after, not the security team moving, not the chaos of 400 people processing the same image simultaneously, just that first sound. Sharp, metallic, institutional, completely wrong for the ceremonial silence of a wedding hall where 2 people were 3 sentences away from becoming permanent. That sound was the moment everything changed, and it happened because of me. The red velvet caught air the way heavy fabric does when it has been closed for hours, all at once, billowing outward in one theatrical sweep, 12 feet of it catching the chandelier light and throwing it back across the room. The service corridor behind it opened like a wound. And there he was. Backlit, perfectly, completely backlit. The window behind him threw his silhouette into sharp relief against the warm gold of the ceremony hall. Rifle raised, body positioned. Every line of him reading exactly as what he was, a man who had been patient for a very long time and was now one trigger pull away from finished. The red dot disappeared from Joon-seo's chest. There was a half-second of absolute silence after that. The kind of silence that only happens when 400 people receive the same information at the same time, and none of them have yet decided what to do with it. A collective intake of breath so complete it felt like the room itself was holding still. The efficient's book froze mid-page. Yuna's hands were still holding Joon-seo's, both of them turned now toward the east wall, toward the open curtain, toward the shape that had no business being there. And then the room broke open. The screaming started from the middle and spread outward like a current. Guests moving toward exits. Guests frozen in their seats. Chairs scraping marble. Someone's champagne glass hitting the floor. The specific sound of 400 people realizing at the same moment that the room they were standing in was not the room they thought it was 60 seconds ago. Joon-seo's security moved before the first scream finished. They came from everywhere. From near the entrance. From the sides of the hall, from positions I had not identified as security positions because they were designed not to be identified, converging on the service corridor with the kind of precision that is not instinct, it is rehearsal. They had prepared for exactly this category of moment. They just had not expected it today. The sniper had 2 exits. Both were covered before he reached either. And I was still standing at the east wall, rope in my hand, curtain still swaying, every eye in that room that was not tracking an exit or a guard or the space where the sniper had been was finding me. A black woman in a catering uniform, standing next to an open curtain, at a Korean Mafia boss's wedding. Tell me, what story did you just build in your head? Because that is exactly the story that room built in the next 10 seconds, and I could not stop it. They moved like they had done this before, because they had. I watched Joon-seo's security team converge on that service corridor, and I understood something I had not fully understood before. This was not a reaction. This was a protocol. A choreography that had been rehearsed for exactly this category of emergency, built into the muscle memory of men who had spent years preparing for the moment their principal's safety failed. They had just never expected it to fail here. Not today, not at a wedding. The sniper had 2 exits. Both were covered in under 4 seconds. He made it 12 feet down the corridor before he was on the ground. No shots fired, no dramatic struggle, just 4 men who knew exactly what controlled force looked like folding one man who had run completely out of options. Zip-tied, removed, gone from the corridor in under 90 seconds. Alive. That last part was deliberate. I understood it even then. The specific care Joon-seo's men took, the way they handled the capture, the way they made sure he stayed conscious, the way they moved him toward the private wing instead of the nearest exit, said everything about what came next. Dead men give no answers. This organization did not want a body. They wanted a conversation. But here is the part that stayed with me long after the screaming stopped, and the guests were corralled, and the venue staff were running damage control on a wedding that was never going to recover. The sniper had known which corridor to use. He had known the curtain would be closed. He had known the precise gap in the security formation, the exact blind spot that 12 trained men had collectively created without realizing it. He had known all of that before he walked in. Which meant someone had told him. Someone who had been inside this wedding long before today. Someone who had studied the security grid, mapped the blind spots, and handed that information to a man with a rifle. The sniper was captured, but the person who built the plan was still in the room. And nobody was looking for them yet. Only the most intelligent viewers caught that detail. The sniper had help from the inside. If your mind is already 10 steps ahead figuring out who the traitor is, your ego is completely justified. Subscribe right now so you never miss a plot twist, because honestly, reading the room is a survival skill we both share. If you aren't subscribed, you're just as vulnerable as those 12 guards. Nobody thanked me. I want you to sit with that for a second before I tell you what happened next. 400 people, 12 security personnel, a groom whose chest had carried a red dot 60 seconds ago, and not one person in that hall looked at me and said a single word that resembled gratitude. What they did, instead, was look at me, the way people look at something they have not yet decided how to categorize. The hall was coming apart in the particular way that expensive rooms come apart when something goes wrong, not loudly, not all at once, but in layers. Some guests were moving toward exits with the controlled urgency of people who understood instinctively that this room was no longer safe. Some were frozen in their seats, still processing. The officiant was holding his ceremony book against his chest like it was the only solid object left in the world. Yuna had stepped back from the altar, one hand raised toward her mouth, veil slightly displaced. The expression on her face was the specific expression of someone whose most important day has just become something she will spend years trying to forget. And I was standing at the east wall, still in my black and white uniform, still holding the curtain rope, the red velvet still swaying gently beside me. I was not invisible anymore. Every eye that was not tracking an exit or a guard was finding me, and I could see the calculation running, the attempt to build a story from the available pieces, the maid, the curtain, the timing, the fact that she was already in position, the fact that she knew exactly when to move. I put the rope down. I straightened my uniform. I stood completely still because moving felt like confession. One of Joon-seo's family members was already talking. I could not hear the words, but I did not need to. The tone was the same in every language. The pointed finger does not require translation. I had just saved a man's life. And the room had already decided I was suspicious for doing it. Before his security formation fully closed around him, he turned. Not toward the corridor where his men had taken the sniper. Not toward Yuna. Not toward the efficient or the guests still finding their feet or the space where the rifle had been. He turned toward the east wall. Toward me. I want to be precise about what that look was and what it was not. It was not gratitude. It was not relief. It was not the look of a man who had just survived something and needed a moment to process his own survival. Joon-seo Kang did not appear to process things the way ordinary people process things. He appeared to file them. What it was assessment. Complete, efficient, unhurried assessment. The look of a man whose entire existence depended on reading people accurately, who had just watched a catering worker at his own wedding identify a threat his trained security missed, make a decision in under 7 seconds, and execute the only available move with nothing but her bare hands and a curtain rope. He was recalculating something. I could see it happening in real time. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then one of his men said something low and urgent, and the formation closed around him, and he was moving toward the private rooms at the hall's rear, controlled, purposeful, already 3 steps into whatever came next. He did not look back. But those 3 seconds stayed with me in a way I could not immediately explain, because nobody had looked at me like that all morning. Nobody had looked at me like I was something worth seeing. I was still standing in the same spot, rope at my feet, curtain settling. My hands had stopped shaking. I did not know when that had happened. They got a name in 40 minutes. I know this because of the way it moved through the remaining security personnel, not announced, not broadcast, just passed quietly from one man to the next like something that needed to be handled carefully before it was spoken out loud. A current running beneath the surface of a room, still visibly recovering from what had just happened. The name was Derek Solt. I heard it twice before I understood it meant something. The second time I heard it, the man saying it had gone completely still in the middle of a sentence. Not the stillness of someone searching for words. The stillness of someone who has just connected 2 things that should have been connected a long time ago and is now sitting with the weight of what that connection means. Derek Solt was not a name that belonged to this world. No organization, no known affiliations, no history in the circles Joon-seo operated within. By every visible measure, he was an ordinary man in his late 30s who ran a mid-sized logistics company and lived in the kind of neighborhood where nothing interesting ever happened. But names carry histories their owners cannot erase. Derek Solt had attended Westfield High School, graduated 17 years ago, unremarkable record, 1 disciplinary note, and in that same graduating class, 3 years ahead of Derek, had been a student named Joon-seo Kang, Joon-seo's older brother. Now here is where this story stops being about a wedding and starts being about something much older and much darker than anything that happened in that hall today. Joon-seo had been everything Derek was not, magnetic, dominant, the kind of person that smaller, quieter people orbit without choosing to. He had also been casually brutal in the way that certain powerful people are brutal, without effort, without consequence, without ever fully registering the damage they leave behind. Derek Solt had been one of his targets, not the only one, but the one who never recovered. Joon-seo Kang had died 2 years ago, a car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside the city. No other vehicles involved. The investigation had been thorough and had produced nothing conclusive. The Kang family had never fully accepted that finding. Joon-seo was too careful, too experienced, too instinctively cautious to die the way the report described. They had kept a file open. They had followed threads. None of those threads had led anywhere, until now. Because the financial trail that connected Derek Solt to the wedding, a payment made 8 days ago, traced through 2 shell accounts, did not stop there. It kept going, backward, 2 years and 3 months. A separate transaction, a different operative, made 11 days before Hyun-woo Kang's car accident. Derek had killed Hyun-woo, planned it quietly, executed it cleanly, and spent 2 years believing it was finished. But Joon-seo had taken over. The family had continued. The Kang name kept carrying weight in the world Derek needed it to disappear from. And that survival, that simple, stubborn fact of the family's survival, was the insult Derek Solt could not absorb. So he came back. His second move cracked open his first. The attack he had planned as a conclusion became instead his complete and total exposure. And here is the part that should make every single one of you uncomfortable. Derek Solt was not a monster from the beginning. He was a boy who was made small repeatedly by someone who never once looked back. He carried that smallness for 17 years. He built it into a plan. And by the time anyone thought to look for him, the damage had already been done twice. What do you do with that? We all carry scars, but holding a grudge for 17 years takes a special kind of dark, unrelenting dedication. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limit by someone with power? Don't just watch from the shadows. Comment down below if you think Derek's revenge was justified. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you are denying yourself the thrill. The real story is just getting started, and you don't want to be left behind. The hall was nearly empty by the time he found me. Not Joon-seo, not yet. Someone older. Someone whose exhaustion was the specific kind that comes not from one hard day, but from years of managing the fallout of other people's decisions. He moved through the remaining space in the hall the way someone moves when they have spent a long time learning how to be unnoticed, not invisible the way I was invisible, but unremarkable, forgettable on purpose. He stopped beside me at the refreshment station. He did not introduce himself. He waited until I looked at him directly, the way people wait when they already know you will look eventually and they are not in a hurry. I had been collecting glasses, not because anyone asked me to, because I did not know what else to do with my hands, and standing still in that room felt like waiting for something else to go wrong. The venue staff had already questioned me. Brief, efficient, transactional. Where were you standing? What did you see? Had you noticed anything unusual before the incident? I had answered everything completely and been thanked with the particular efficiency of people who had other problems to manage and had already moved me to the bottom of the list. Nobody from the Kang side had spoken to me. No acknowledgement. No recognition that anything I had done was connected to anything that had happened. I had pulled a curtain at the right moment and saved a man's life and been returned to invisible so fast it felt like the room had practiced it. Then this man appeared beside me. He said 4 words. Mr. Kang would like a brief conversation. The phrasing was polite. The tone carried no alternative. I put down the glass I was holding. I looked at this man whose name I did not know, and whose position I could not read, and whose presence beside me meant that somewhere in this building Joon-seo Kang had not forgotten those 3 seconds of eye contact across a broken room. I followed him. And here is what I need you to understand before I tell you what happened next. I was not naive. I was not starstruck. I was not walking toward something I did not recognize for what it was. I was walking toward it anyway. The room was small, well-furnished. The kind of room designed specifically for conversations that cannot happen anywhere else. Joon-seo was already there when I entered, jacket removed, the gardenia boutonniere gone, the controlled architecture of his expression unchanged, which told me everything about how he processed crisis, not with visible emotion, with adjustment. The man who had been 60 seconds from death at his own wedding looked like someone who had already filed that fact and moved 3 problems forward. He did not stand when I came in. He did not offer pleasantries. He looked at me for a moment in the same way he had looked at me from across the hall, completing a calculation he had already started, and then he placed a document on the table between us. I did not touch it immediately. I read it from where I stood. Private household employment. Several pages, dense with terms, and at the bottom of the first page, a compensation figure that made everything I currently earned feel like a rounding error. Personal maid, Private household, 24 hours to decide. I looked at the number. I looked at him. I asked the only question that actually mattered. Not about the money, not about the terms. I asked why. He was quiet for a moment, not searching for words, deciding how many the situation required. You saw something my trained security did not see, he said. You made a correct decision under conditions that would have stopped most people completely. You did it in 7 seconds. He stood, moved toward the door, stopped without turning. The man who sent the shooter, he said, and his voice had shifted into something flat and fully decided. He also killed my brother. We are handling it. Then he left. And I stood alone in that room with a contract on the table and the specific silence of a man who had just told me 2 things at once. The first was an offer. The second was a warning dressed as information. The question was whether I was smart enough to hear both. A blank check and a dangerous new life. You have the intelligence to know this isn't just a job offer. It's a trap and a test of loyalty. If you are sharp enough to read between the lines of Joon-seo's contract, you absolutely need to be subscribed to this channel. Hit that like button right now if you would have signed your name on that dotted line, knowing the danger that comes with it. The Kang residence did not feel like a home. It felt like a position. Every room was arranged the way a chessboard is arranged, not for comfort, but for control. Sight lines, entry points, the specific placement of furniture that tells you someone has thought carefully about who stands where and why. I noticed it the moment I walked through the front entrance, and I filed it the way I file everything. Quietly, without showing that I noticed. The household staff noticed me noticing. That was the first problem. There were 6 of them already in place when I arrived. People who had been inside this house for months, some for years, people who understood its rhythms and its rules and the particular language of loyalty that a household like this one runs on. They acknowledged my arrival the way you acknowledge something that has been placed in your space without your input. Politely, carefully, with the specific warmth of people who have already decided how they feel and are simply waiting for the right moment to show it. 2 of them had been at the wedding. I recognized their faces. They had watched me pull that curtain. They had watched the room break open and the sniper get taken and Joon-seo's security scramble to contain something they had not anticipated. And then they had watched Joon-seo bring me here. I understood what that looked like from where they were standing. A woman nobody knew, elevated without explanation, inserted into the inner household of a man whose trust was the most valuable currency in the building. No history, no context, just a curtain rope and 3 seconds of eye contact, and suddenly she lives here. I was not naive enough to think that sat well with anyone. I was assigned to the East Wing. Specific rooms, specific hours, framed as logistics, functioning as limitation. I accepted it without comment. I learned the layout. I watched the patterns. I did the job I was assigned, and I did the other job, the real one, at the same time. And on the 3rd day, I noticed something that did not belong. It was a schedule that did not match. That was the first thing, small enough to dismiss, specific enough that I could not. The household ran on a printed daily schedule, meal times, staff rotations, security check-ins, visitor windows. I had memorized it on day 1 because memorizing the structure of a room is how I operate. It is not something I decide to do. It is something I do automatically, the way some people check their phone and some people check exits. On the 3rd morning, the schedule said the East Corridor was unoccupied between 10 and 11. I was in the East Corridor at 10:14. And someone was already there. Not a guard, not another staff member running behind. Someone standing near the far window with a phone pressed flat against their thigh, not raised, not visible, but active. The screen casting a faint light downward that you would only catch if you were at the right angle and looking for the wrong thing. I had been at the right angle my entire life. I did not stop walking. I did not change my pace. I moved through that corridor the way I moved through every corridor in this house, like furniture, like function, like someone with somewhere else to be. And I cataloged everything I saw in the 4 seconds it took me to pass. The staff member's name was Paul. He had been in the Kang household for 3 years. He had access to the private wing. He knew Joon-seo's daily movement patterns better than almost anyone in the building. And he did not know I had seen him. That was the second thing, not the phone, not the schedule gap. The specific way he did not react to my presence, too relaxed, too still, the practiced calm of someone who has spent time learning how to look like they have nothing to hide. I had seen that stillness before, on a man behind a curtain with a rifle. I kept walking. I said nothing. I started counting the days until it happened again. Because it was going to happen again. And the next time, I needed to know exactly what I was seeing before I decided what to do with it. Paul was not a killer. That is the part that kept pulling at me as the days passed and the picture got clearer. He was not violent. He was not dangerous in any physical sense. He was something quieter than that, and in some ways something more destructive. He was a man who had decided that information was a commodity, and that the person living in this house was a resource he could quietly drain without consequence. Derek Solt had not needed a second shooter. He had needed a window, a continuous, reliable, current window into Joon-seo's movements, schedule, vulnerabilities, and patterns. He had needed someone already trusted, already inside, already invisible to the people around him. He had needed Paul. The financial connection took 4 more days to confirm. A payment trail thin enough to miss if you were looking for something obvious and precise enough to find if you were looking for something patient. The number matched the third transaction from Derek Solt's account, the one that had been identified at the wedding, but not yet traced. It led back through a single shell to an account Paul had opened 14 months ago, 7 months before the wedding was even announced publicly. He had been in position before the plan was fully formed. Derek had purchased his access early, carefully, and had let it sit until he needed it. 3 years of loyalty inside the Kang household. 3 years of access to the private wing. 3 years of learning exactly how this house operated and exactly where its blind spots were. And then one quiet transaction that turned all of that into a weapon. Here is what that means, and I need you to sit with it. The threat at the wedding was not built in a day. It was built across 3 years of someone smiling at Joon-seo across breakfast and handing him his schedule and standing inside his trust like it was shelter. The snake was not at the door. It had been at the table the entire time. And nobody had seen it, not the security team, not Mr. Doe, not Joon-seo himself. Nobody, except the woman who was hired to be invisible. The most lethal betrayals don't come from your enemies. They come from the people smiling at you over your morning coffee. You know exactly how that feels, don't you? If you've ever been stabbed in the back by someone you completely trusted, smash that like button. We see the real you here. Subscribe now, because the most dangerous lies are the ones we let inside our own homes. He came to me on a Tuesday morning. Quiet hall, no other staff nearby, the kind of coincidence that is not a coincidence at all. Paul stopped in the doorway of the room I was working in, and he did not threaten me. That is the part I want you to understand before I tell you what he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not move toward me. He stood in that doorway with the specific stillness of someone who has thought carefully about this conversation and decided that the most effective version of it looks calm. He told me things. About Joon-seo. About what the Kang organization had done over the years it had operated. The specific, detailed kind of information that does not come from newspapers or rumors, but from 3 years of living inside the walls of a man's private life. He laid it out quietly and completely, and without apparent emotion, the way someone lays out evidence when they want you to feel the weight of it before they make their ask. Then he made his ask. He told me that what I had seen in the corridor could stay between us, that I had pulled one curtain already and survived the consequences by luck and proximity, that the next curtain I pulled might not have the same outcome, that a woman in my position, my specific position, my specific history, my specific lack of connection to anyone in this organization who would speak for me if something went wrong, would be wise to consider carefully what seeing things clearly was actually costing her. He was not wrong about any of it. That is the most uncomfortable part of what I am about to tell you. I stood there and I listened, and I felt the calculation running the same way it had run in the wedding hall. Every option, every angle, every cost. And for a long moment, I genuinely did not know which direction I was going to move. What stopped me was not courage. It was not loyalty to Joon-seo or moral certainty or any clean, comfortable reason. It was the dot, the memory of that red dot sitting still on his chest while everyone looked the wrong way. My whole life I had been the person at the correct angle who said nothing. I was not doing it again. I looked at Paul. I straightened my uniform, and I told him I needed to speak with Mr. Kang. The expression that moved across his face in that moment was not anger. It was the specific look of someone who has just run out of moves and knows it. Good, now we were even. Paul was removed from the household before lunch. No announcement, no confrontation in front of the staff, no dramatic moment that anyone could point to later and say that was when everything changed. He was simply there in the morning and gone by afternoon, the way things disappear in houses like this one, quietly, completely, without leaving a visible mark. That is how Joon-seo operated, not with noise, with erasure. Derek Solt's full exposure collapsed both cases at once. The wedding attack and Hyun-woo's death, two separate events separated by 2 years, folded into a single confirmed reality in the space of one afternoon. The cold case that the Kang family had kept open out of instinct and grief closed not slowly, but all at once, the way a structure fails when the last thing holding it together finally gives. Mr. Doe resigned 3 days later, not forced out, gone, because a security chief whose perimeter failed twice in the same week understands without being told that his authority has an expiration date. He packed his office on a Thursday morning and left before anyone arrived for the day. I passed his empty desk on my way to the East Wing, and I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. He had been corrupt, he had just been certain, and certainty, I was learning, was its own kind of blindness. Yuna did not return to the house. Nobody said this directly. It became clear the way certain truths become clear in closed households. Through absence, through the removal of small things, through rooms that stopped being prepared for 2 and started being prepared for 1. Whatever the wedding was supposed to begin had ended before it started. I did not ask about it. It was not my place to ask. But I thought about her, more than I expected to. Joon-seo called me to the private room on a Friday evening. Same room as before, same controlled stillness. He told me that the matter was resolved, that Paul had been handled, that the organization was conducting a full internal review of every access point that had been compromised. Then he told me one more thing. He said that during Paul's questioning, a detail had surfaced about Hyun-woo's final days that the original investigation had never found. He did not tell me what the detail was. He told me that it had changed something for him, that it had closed a door he had not realized was still open. He looked at me for a long moment after that. Then he said, "You were right to come to me." 6 words, that was all. No ceremony, no performance. Just 6 words from a man who did not give them easily, which meant they weighed exactly as much as they needed to. I walked back to the East Wing, and I sat with everything that had happened from that wedding hall to this moment. A 17-year-old wound that became 2 murders and a failed third. A man who could not stop. A house that had been quietly compromised for 3 years by someone who smiled across breakfast every morning. And me, still here, still watching, still the person at the correct angle. The danger was not finished. I knew that without being told. An organization does not absorb this kind of fracture cleanly. The review Joon-seo mentioned would surface more names, more compromised access points, more people who had made quiet decisions inside walls they were trusted to protect. Which meant my real job was just beginning. You know the real threat is already inside the house. Don't abandon Kira to these vipers like everyone else did. Subscribe to Mafia Shock Vault right now and comment who the traitor is.